Man, I hate the Bucks. Just because they never let us win. Like, one, you're already so much better than us, and they've beaten us what feels like 25 times in a row right now. So I wish we could just get one game against them. Not even in the playoffs, not even in the last regular season. The Bucks always just come here and whoop Pistons' ass, no matter if it's on the moon, in Auburn, or not Auburn Hills anymore. Even in Auburn Hills, they're still waxing us. But in Detroit or in Milwaukee. So not super exciting to talk about. For those of us joining now, and I see obviously the numbers going up, I am Ryan. I'm with the Sports Carnage podcast that's put out every Thursday by Detroit Sports Nation. We have our episode tomorrow, so go ahead and check that out if you haven't. We usually do these post-game reactions. Now, there was a lot of stuff that happened last night that we wanted to get to, but we just couldn't. So the Pistons had, before this game, 2 back-to-back 30-point wins, first time in franchise history, which is really cool, even though it was against 2 bad teams in the Spurs and the Cavaliers. Weren't able to do that because we were actually podcasting, and then Michigan got smoked by Louisville, and my Spartans got smoked by Duke. And I did want to go live after those games, but again, we were podcasting, and then after the Duke game, after the Michigan State Duke game ended, it was probably like midnight. So at that point, I just went to bed. So I do apologize for not giving you guys that. But as far as the Pistons tonight go, I never expected to beat the Bucks. Luke Kennard missed the game, although he wouldn't have made a huge difference in the outcome, only because every time the Pistons lose to the Bucks, Luke Kennard plays. There was one aspect that I did like from the Pistons tonight, and it was how chippy the game got, only because that proves to you that at least they're not scared, and they have every reason to be quote-unquote scared of Milwaukee. It's a team that, again, always beats them, swept them in the playoffs. They have a way better player than the Pistons have had in, like, literally probably since Isaiah Thomas. That's how good that Giannis is. But the Pistons, if you saw the game, you saw it. They didn't back down. There were a couple times they were getting in each other's faces. Dre had a big dunk over Giannis. Blake was talking with Chris Middleton, who of course used to play for the Pistons. So I like to see that. I like to see that fight that the Pistons had. And for a while, the game was, it was pretty respectable and close. And then probably about like halfway through the third quarter, the Bucks just started to, run away with it and really just ran the Pistons off the floor. But I did like to see that they didn't just end up laying down in the game and, handing it to the Bucks like we've seen so many other times. And then another pretty positive for the Pistons tonight was they got a decent performance from most of their bench players. Derrick Rose kind of sticks out as one guy that didn't. He shot 6 for 15, had 14 points, but of course didn't shoot well, 5 assists. But other guys, Langston Galloway played really well. He played 38 minutes coming off the bench, and there's actually more minutes than anybody else on the team. So, he was kind of their lead horse tonight, if you will. And Andre Drummond played fantastic as well. He did have the 1-3 that he shot, which was pretty funny. I think it was late in the shot clock. It was a really bad miss. But other than that, 23 points, 14 boards, 5 assists, 2 steals, and 3 blocks. So a really full stat line from Drummond. That's really kind of all you got is the bench contributions. If the starters played better, this is a game that the Pistons probably win because the bench was able to chip in so much. But also if the starters play better, then maybe the bench isn't on the floor as much as they were. But you got 5 points from Thon, you got 7 points from Wood, 5 points from Markieff, 14 from Derrick Rose, and 20 from Langston. So overall, that's 34, 41. You got 51 points from your bench, which on any other night is like a really good bench performance. But again, your starters only got you 52, and you can't have the ratio be 50-50 or you're not going to win a ton of games because it's good for your bench. But for your starters, it just means they didn't pull their weight. And that's really exactly what happened. It was a terrible game for Bruce Brown, who he had 0 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. 1 turnover and 2 fouls. So, he's basically just out there kind of running around in 21 minutes. Siem Hailu, kind of the same thing. 2 for 8 with only 6 points in 28 minutes. Tony Snell, 27 minutes, 7 points, 1 rebound, 2 assists. So, and even Blake Griffin played pretty bad shooting the ball. 16 points, 10 boards. Looks like a pretty nice double-double. But he shot, he took 17 shots to get it. He was 4 for 17. So you weren't able to get a consistent performance from really anyone in your starting lineup outside of Andre Drummond, and that's what made the difference for the game. Also, the Bucks are just way bigger than the Pistons are. You saw them really start to pull away when guys like Chris Middleton started to attack, because Langston Galloway and the other wing defenders, they're just smaller, and you can't hang with guys like Chris Middleton. You can't hang with guys like Giannis simply because you're just not big enough. To that point, Giannis and Middleton led the Bucks in scoring. Giannis at 35 and Middleton had 17, and both of them on some pretty nice efficiency. Chris Middleton 6 of 12, right at 50%, and then Giannis at 12 of 21, which is just a little under 60%, if my math is correct, and it is. So that's really what you got. Eric Bledsoe had a pretty nice game as well, and the Pistons just weren't able to do anything with them. Let's get some of the questions here. Albert Lou says Giannis tonight got away with a lot of diving and flopping. That's really just the NBA in general now, especially Giannis, a guy who gets a ton of calls because he's so big and he's so hard to officiate. A lot like Shaq was in the early 2000s, where if you wanted to, every time you could probably call a foul on Giannis or on the defense simply because he's so big. So if the defense is trying stopping him, more than likely they're smacking his just enormous body and frame. And if they're not, then Giannis is probably, driving his elbow into somebody or his shoulder when he's going up, and you could really call a foul on either ends both times. With that being said, I don't know exactly how many fouls that Giannis drew, but he did only go to the line 9 times, which is not, it's not like he's Harden going to the line 20 times or something like that, where every time they get the ball, seemingly a foul is called. Jim asked, do you think Casey is on the hot seat if we don't make the playoffs? I don't think so. I think the Pistons are pretty if the Pistons don't make the playoffs, this is a better way to put it. If the Pistons don't make the playoffs, the Pistons are going to be pretty committed, I think, to the youth movement, which is guys like Shvi, guys like Jordan Bone, Sekou, and Luke, obviously. And Dwayne Casey is a guy that was able to develop young talent in Toronto. So I think they probably stick with him for like another 2 or 3 years after this. Get some high draft picks and just see if next year, if the Pistons do make the playoffs and then they decide to, go more rebuilding than they have previously, I think they just see kind of the fruits of their labor, and then they'd make a decision on Dwayne Casey. But I also don't think Dwayne Casey is the problem. Some of his rotations you can question, but he also doesn't have a lot to work with. So when you have a team like the Pistons where your talent isn't great, you really, you're kind of trying to play guys who have the hot hand. That's one of the reasons that Langston played 38 minutes tonight, is because he played better than, really anybody else on the team except for Andre. And then I think you saw Svi the other night get a ton of minutes, and same thing. The night Christian Wood had 28. Same thing. He's kind of riding the hot hand, which is part of the reason his rotations have been wonky, even if the wonky rotations really haven't been good. And they need more of a source of offense, which is, I think, really one of the biggest criticisms that you can give some of his worst rotations, where it's just nobody that can score, or it's only Derrick Rose and then a bunch of guys that aren't doing anything. And then, as you see tonight and as you've seen kind of throughout the season, that's how you get the really inefficient Derrick Rose performances. He started off the season really well, and then he got hurt. And since he's come back, he just really hasn't been able to kind of recapture the magic that he had in his first, 5 or 6 games or so. Will Clay says, yeah, besides Blake, my Pistons too weak dealing with elite physicality. Yeah, I mean, and even Blake, you saw him get punked by Giannis physically a couple times, and that's not saying that Blake's weak or anything like that. It's just really a testament to how just how kind of wild of an athlete Giannis is. And he's really somebody that anybody except for like Kawhi or Anthony Davis, who's obviously way bigger than him, everybody else gets punked by him too. So that's not necessarily a criticism on Blake. And Andre, he doesn't really get punked physically by a bunch of dudes. He's too slow. So with Andre, it's a little bit weirder because usually he's not dominated by strength. It's just like the bigs that they go outside A guy like Brook Lopez, who has traditionally given Andre some trouble in the past. He had a pretty quiet night tonight, only 5 points and 6 rebounds. So tonight's not the best example. But you've seen guys like Brook Lopez, guys like Pascal Siakam, Marcus Hall. The bigger guys that can shoot outside, those are the guys that give Dre a little bit more trouble than, say, a guy like DeAndre Jordan. In the words of Sir Charles, terrible. They let Giannis get in their heads. Yeah, it's still a pretty average performance from Giannis. I know he increased his scoring, but he's averaging like 30 and 14 on the year anyway, and tonight he had 35 and 9. So you limited some of the rebounding that he was able to get, and then you let him score some more points. So this wasn't like every game that he plays is a terrific game just because he's a great basketball player, but this wasn't like a transcendent Giannis game. Although after things did start to get chippy, the Pistons, I think the Bucks probably took it a little bit more seriously than they were before. And when a team that much better than you starts to really focus in, that's kind of what you see. And I don't want to make this like the Pistons are bad because they lost this game and they lost it by a large amount. The Bucks are 19-3. And I understand it's a home game, and it's obviously one that you want to win, and it's kind of a measuring bar for where your team's at. But the Bucks they probably have the best record in the NBA because I think the Lakers have like 4 losses now, 4 or 5. And the Bucks, are still there sitting at 19-3, and it's a team that won, over 60 games last year. So it's a really good team that they just lost to. And, once you start getting chippy with better teams, if they're kind of playing lackadaisical or if you're able to hang with them, that's when they flip the switch, so to say, and, kind of exert their dominance and show you, okay, you guys want to play with us and you guys want to try and push us around. Now we're just going to go ahead and, absolutely dominate you on the basketball court. We're going to lock in defensively. We're going to be smarter offensively, more aggressive, and it's a team that's, good at getting to the line. Credit the Bucks free throw shooting tonight too, 25 of 27. Which is tremendous. So, we sent them to the line a lot, and they made the most out of literally every single opportunity, as opposed to the Pistons, who only made 14 out of 22 of their free throw attempts. 2 young guys, who about Louis King? What? Dan, I don't know what you said, Albert, but I appreciate it. Jim says the only good team we beat so far is the Pacers. That is true. But there's also not many good teams in the in the NBA in general, especially in the East. There are a couple good teams, and the Pistons aren't a good team, so you don't expect them to go ahead and dominate some of the better teams in the East, like the Raptors, like the Celtics, the Sixers, obviously the Bucks. But everybody else you hope they can kind of hang with. But, the Pistons have been really pedestrian the last couple of games. Well, they were pedestrian to start the season, and now in their last 8 games, they're 4-4, but in their last 7, of course, before tonight's loss, they were 4-3. So there was definitely signs of progress moving forward, and that all kind of coincided with Blake Griffin coming back. Brian says it's time to rebuild and trade your talent while you can. Whoops. He said time to rebuild and trade your talent while you can. That'll be the move if they end up so far out of the playoff race, but I don't expect them to be, tremendously outside of the top 8 in the East. Mason says, don't make Dre move all around. You kind of have to now. I don't know if you mean the Pistons or the defense or the offense on the other team. But, if you're in offense playing against Detroit, you want Andre Drummond moving all around because he's obviously way better and way more intimidating when he's able to kind of just patrol the paint and block and alter shots, because you have maybe a center that's not capable of hitting an 18-foot jump shot. But then when you have one of those, it obviously opens the floor up because you're taking that inside threat and that inside defender, and, you're playing them out on the perimeter. And you're obviously not going to just let the guy stand out on the perimeter because then they're just going to make threes. And 3 points is, of course, more than 2. Going back to that math earlier, which I know is correct, 3 is always going to be greater than 2. Sammy says, Ryan, let's be real. The Pistons not even in the same class of the Bucks. That is, of course, true. Not even close. Their backcourt is horrible. Their backcourt, well, yeah, it's horrible now because you're starting guys like, was their starting backcourt tonight, Svi and Bruce? Yep. She and Bruce, which is a horrible starting backcourt, but that's also not the backcourt that they want moving forward. Obviously, Luke Kennard missed tonight, and then Reggie Jackson hasn't been in what seems like forever now. He says, and by the way, I don't get why you always be hyping up D Rose. I don't hype up Derrick Rose. He had a great start to the season, and I think everybody, most of the Pistons fans, hyped him up to start the season, which is, of course, expected because he was playing like stupid well the first couple games. But, I said it in this one, and I just don't know if you're here yet. But since he's come back, he hasn't really played well, and he's been very, very turnover prone. Not tonight. He only had the one turnover, but he still didn't shoot well. So you're starting to get some of the more inefficient Derrick Rose. But, if it'd be foolhardy to think that he was going to continue his pace for the first 3 or 4 games of the year. Literally, he only had one game since he's been here. That is also not true. His first 4 games here were all pretty incredible. But again, Derrick Rose isn't the answer as a starting point guard. He's really nice to have come off the bench when you have a guy like Reggie Jackson who can initiate the offense, on your first unit. But you don't want Derrick Rose playing 30, 35 minutes a night because, one, he'll get hurt, and 2, he is not efficient enough for that. He used to obviously be a great player, but now he's a guy who still needs the ball in his hands to be the most effective. He's never going to be a great distributor like a guy like Ricky Rubio is, like a guy like, Rajon Rondo is, who you have them as backup point guards. Or I don't know if Rubio's a backup right now. I don't really know what they're doing in Phoenix. If Booker's still running the point or if Rubio's running the point. But regardless, guys like Rajon Rondo and Ricky Rubio, who are great distributors, that is not what Derrick Rose is. Does Louis King have a bright future with Jordan Bone, Sekou, and others since you mentioned Coach Casey about the youth movement? I haven't seen any of Louis King. The name kind of sounds familiar. The guy that's kind of interesting is Servidis, who he's still overseas now, but he's a guy that the Pistons picked up as well. Louis King, let's see, number 14, small forward. I'm assuming he's in Grand Rapids because if I go to his game log, he's 6'7", rookie out of Oregon. I don't even know him on Oregon. He hasn't played at all. I'd have to see what he's doing in Grand Rapids to be able to be able to see. But my guess is at some point, especially if the Pistons are really bad, you'll see a lot of those guys that, even if they might believe in them just a smidge, they'll be up here, especially if the Pistons end up moving Thon Maker or even Langston at the trade deadline, who seems like he might be, if the Pistons do decide to be in sell mode at the trade deadline, Langston Galloway is a guy that has really been kind of upping his value now. GMR Boilermakers took care of business tonight. Yeah, they did. They beat Virginia by 30. That was crazy. All those top teams in college going down. Doesn't really make me feel better about Michigan State because they still lost 3 games. But it makes you feel a little bit better that everybody else is losing too. So maybe you're not losing that much ground. I am worried about them though. I didn't think I'd be, but man, it's rough. Let me see, because now I'm interested. Louis King, Grand Rapids Drive. Let's see what that man is doing. And this is all for you, Albert. All this Louis King knowledge that we're doing here. So he's played in 9 games. He started 8, 18 points a game. Not very good on threes. 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 blocks, 1 steal, turnovers. Just from what I'm seeing here, he's a good free throw shooter. So it's weird that he's such a bad 3-point shooter, although he doesn't shoot that many free throws a game. What we're seeing here, you probably will see Louis King at some point up here. Just even looking at his point per game averages, 18 points a game down in Grand Rapids. The Pistons at some point are going to need some type of offense off the bench. And my guess is that Derrick Rose and Blake Griffin and these guys that typically aren't healthy throughout their careers are still going to go down with injuries at some point, and then you'll need to bring guys, or it'll make more sense to bring a guy like Louis King up and let him play as opposed to, throwing a guy like Thon Maker back on the court, even though Thon has been kind of getting run out of the rotation. He had 3 minutes tonight in the game Christian Wood went off. I think Thon Maker only probably had 5 minutes, if that. So maybe you'll see a nice Thon Maker for Louis King swap here in the near future, or Thon just gets a bunch of, did not play coach's decisions type thing. Mason says we need to trade now vets for picks. Even if we make the playoffs, they won't compete. Been saying it for months. So if you trade your vets for picks now, the only problem with that is your young guys don't ever have any semblance of winning, really. Luke Kennard has been to the playoffs one time, and in that one time, the Pistons got swept. So you don't want to have a bunch of young guys that don't end up with a culture of winning unless they're super, super talented, like Philadelphia were, right, with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. And you could tell that those guys were way better players than really anybody at the Pistons have now. And for them, maybe losing wasn't so much of a black mark. But for the Pistons, if you do end up tanking, that's the problem that you run into, is by the time you figure all these guys will be quote unquote ready, they don't know how to win in the playoffs. They don't even know how to make the playoffs. They don't know how to navigate throughout an 82-game season. If their team is struggling, they don't know how to deal with expectations, all of that. So that's, of course, where the veterans like Blake and Andre help. But at some point, you have to make a decision, and it's tough for the Pistons still because they do want to make the playoffs. The only one that they really have to worry about moving forward would be Blake Griffin in terms of his contract. Andre will more than likely opt out after this year. Reggie Jackson is gone after this year as well. So, you kind of have a fresh start with all of that. And then I think you probably have Blake for like 2 or 3 more years, even after this one. So Blake's really the only guy that you're worried about long-term, future salary cap wise, and the other dudes are going to be coming off the books. So I think it makes more sense for the Pistons to make the playoffs, even if they're a 7 or 8 seed, and at least teach the younger guys what it feels like to even win 40 games, win 45 games, something like that. So then that they have something to build on, and by the time they're expected to take the reign of the entire team, there is at least some foundation there of what winning more basketball games than you're losing looks like. But I also do understand the other school of thought where, hey, you just absolutely tank out and try to get the number 1 pick and try to draft a guy like Wiseman or a guy like LaMelo Ball, anybody else. Keep Wood, Luke, and Langston. The rest are expendable. Well, Langston Galloway isn't really young. And if you're moving vets, Langston might be one of the guys. Langston might be one of the most coveted guys on the Pistons with how he's played. Because this year he shot the ball really well, and shooting is always a premium in the NBA. And when you get a guy like Langston Galloway on your team, being that he's in, he's still only 27, but it's also his 5th year in the NBA, and it's not a guy that's really going to expect to start. So you saw it with a guy like Wayne Ellington last year, who came to the Pistons and really helped out, but he kind of knew what his role was. That would be Langston Galloway. So if you're going to trade a vet besides Blake and Andre, Langston is probably the guy that actually nets you the most return, only because I don't think there's a big market for Reggie Jackson, which pains me to say. And obviously he hasn't been on the floor, so nobody knows what he's looking like. Been hearing Andre, possible landing spot in Charlotte. Yeah, Charlotte's been the team for it's almost like 2 years now that has always made sense for Andre Drummond, even before obviously they had Kemba, who makes sense with Andre Drummond as like a pick and roll partner, and now they have Terry Rozier, who still make a lot of sense for Drummond. But the piece is that, and you might be able to swindle Michael Jordan out of a deal just because he's a bad leader, or he's a bad owner. Mason Bumpus, Langston won't cost a lot to keep either. He wouldn't cost a lot to keep, but if you're going to be in rebuild mode, or it looks like you said not tanking. But if you're going to be in rebuild mode, you want obviously the assets and the draft picks. And Langston's a guy that's going to net you that. He's not going to get you Luka Doncic in return. But I can see a good team like a contender giving away a late first-round pick for Langston. A team, and I'm not saying Houston would do it. I don't know what their draft pick situation is. But a team like Houston, a team like, well, I don't think the Lakers have any picks, but Lakers, Clippers, not the Warriors this year, Utah, whoever. But a contender who has like a late first-round draft pick, I can see them moving that pick for Langston Galloway. Him and Luke are the reason we went from worst to first in 3% in the league. Yeah, and that's why teams will want Langston. Obviously, you're keeping Luke for the long haul unless you're in buy mode, and then you trade Luke for a guy like DeMar DeRozan, who has also been on the trading block and who would of course help the Pistons win now, except it wouldn't really help their future too much. But I mean, yeah, there have been guys that have been shooting really well for the Pistons. Tony Snell, Shvee, Luke, Langston, like you mentioned. So their three-point shooters have been kind of a pleasant surprise this year, but they played some pretty bad defense, and you don't see that getting much better, only because they don't have a ton of defenders on the team. I know the last like 8 games or so, they've been pretty good at like points per game on the defensive end, but I don't know how that measures out in the advanced statistics. Obviously just because I haven't checked, but just because you're not giving up a lot of points doesn't necessarily mean you're playing good defense. So I'd like to see those, because the Pistons still aren't a good defensive team. They gave up almost 130 points tonight, but over the last 8 points, at least the last 8 games, the total points that they've been giving up have been, just kind of steadily going down and been less and less each game. I think the last 2 games they won by 30, they kept the opponents under 100, and then like 4 or 5 games before that, I want to say they kept them under 102, or they were real close. The other teams had like 101, 104, something like that. Whatever happened to former Piston Reggie Bullock? He signed with the Knicks this year, and I haven't seen him on the court in New York. Well, the Knicks are a mess, but Reggie Bullock, he was on the Knicks. I think he still is, but I want to say like his other sister got murdered or something. And I know he went away from the team for a while because of that, which is more than understandable. But that's a guy that's been through some tragedy, because he had a sister who was murdered, and then I want to say his other sister got killed. So he left the team for some time with that, and I don't know if he's back. But the Knicks are. You talk about tanking. The Knicks are a team that are really tanking, and their rotations in general are just kind of a mess. So I don't know what's going on with Reggie Bullock. He'd help the Pistons here, continue their high 3-point shooting, but it's a sad situation for him for sure. But that's where he's at least in New York, dealing with personal tragedy and dealing with basketball tragedy, because he plays for James Dolan. And David Fizdale is their coach now. Jesus Christ, the Knicks are bad. That's one thing that you guys have to look forward to as Pistons fans, is at least you're not the New York Knicks. Because believe it or not, there are worse franchises you could be fans of, and the Knicks are one of them. Not much worse, because the Pistons are in pretty bad shape, but it could always be bad. We do have we're almost at 30 minutes. So yeah, we're gonna cut this off, and we're gonna cut this short. The Pistons' next game, I think Jim mentioned it, so I'm just gonna say it and then not fact check it. And if I'm wrong, you can blame Jim over there with the Purdue Boilermakers profile picture. But he said their next game was on Friday against the Pacers. I'll go ahead and double check that. Jim is right, so you don't have to send any hate mail to me, to Jim. But the Pistons get a crack against the Blazers on Friday, 7 p.m. at Little Caesars Arena. So if you're not doing anything and the weather isn't horrible, maybe go on down and support them, and then you guys get to see a win, and then you can just watch me in your car afterwards, because that's exactly what you guys want to do as you're driving on the freeway to get home. But go ahead and check out our Sports Carnage podcast if you have not. It should be uploaded tomorrow. If it's not, then we're going to have I have some inner discussions with our editor and co-host, Mr. Matthew Basson. But should be out for you guys tomorrow. You can find it on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Podbean. You can find our reaction videos on YouTube. Just look through Detroit Sports Nation as well. You guys assume you guys are all Detroit sports fan, which is why you're here talking about the Pistons. But look on there, check out. There's consistently just a ton of stories being updated and added to the page. So look at that, find out what's happening with all your favorite teams: Tigers, Red Wings, Michigan State football and basketball, Pistons, Lions. Of course, we got a ton of Lions coverage on there for you guys. And it's really anything that you could ask for. If you actually instant message the page, like Facebook message them, they're really, really good about getting back to you. So if you have any specific questions you want to ask, if you want to, say you want to write for them or anything like that, just any questions you have about the site in general, ask them, add partnerships, whatever you guys are into, any business owners out there. But, Detroit Sports Stations, they're really good at seeing it and then getting back to you for that. And then also our Sports Carnage podcast. So follow us on Facebook in the little blue clicky description right there. It's highlighted blue in the description. If you're watching this on YouTube, it will be in the description below. And then follow us on Twitter as well, which is just at Sports Carnage on Twitter. Made it super easy for you guys. Message us there. We'll respond to you as well. But other than that, rate, subscribe, review the podcast. Give it 5 stars, hopefully, or 1 star, I guess, if you don't like it. But that'd be fairly mean, so don't do that. But 5 stars for our podcast. Share it. Everything about that. We definitely need a Facebook Live about the Red Wings too, Albert says. Albert, I agree with you. I'm just not the man to do that because I personally am just not a big fan of hockey. But I will pass the message along that that the people are demanding and they're fever pitching for Red Wings post-game live. So I'll try and do that for you. But while you're here, Albert, please check out that Sports Carnage podcast. Check out Detroit Sports Nation and all the great content that they have for you guys. And I am out of here. Good night. Got a job interview in the morning, so wish me luck. Thank you.